Okay. Greetings, everybody, tonight. And my name is Fat Dog, and now I'm sporting a new look of Comandante Gordo because we were in Cuba recently. And when we were in Cuba, we went to Hemingway's bar and Hemingway's home. And I read all the time, so I said, I'll read some more Hemingway, and then I decided to have a beard. And then I got this hat down there that some guy on the street sold me, and he said his mom made it. So, yeah. So to start with, if anybody has any questions while I'm talking, please interrupt me, and I'll try to answer them. And I'll start with the foundation, which is my parents. And my parents were frothing commies and frothing feminists. And I was sort of what was called the typical red diaper baby. And we would go to demonstrations in the baby carriage, and we would have people like Pete Seeger in our living room raising money for Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. And we used to go to demonstrations. We'd picket at Woolworth's because of their policies there. And we went to, I had to go down and hear some old minister make a speech, I Have a Dream. And so we really had that sort of background back in Philadelphia and New York. And we used to go to these commie summer camps where it was filled with the children of artists and writers and musicians, and even Julius and Ethel Rosenberg's kids went there, Bobby and Mikey Mirapol, and I think one of them might have even lived in Berkeley for a number of years. And then a lot of my relatives were fighting in the Spanish Civil War with the Republican Army against Franco, and a lot of my relatives were in the different trade unions. So that's sort of a good foundation to start with. And then everybody wants to know Fat Dog, right? Where Fat Dog came from. When I was a boy, my mom used to tell me that a fat dog was the happiest critter in the animal kingdom. It liked to eat, sleep, it did whatever it wanted to do, and then it would sniff around the neighborhood. And that was sort of the basis of my life for many years. When we were teenagers, we had this peace group that was called the Student Peace Union, which employed that peace sign, and our whole neighborhood was filled with what you would call, children of commies or unionists, and all the guys and the men and women that are boys and girls that I played with all came from a similar background. So we would have this the Student Peace Union, and for me, I remember knowing about like Indochina and what was happening there before the United States got involved in the Vietnam War, and we just had a very good view of the world, the civil rights movement, and all the political stuff that was happening. And then we also had bands in high school, and my parents listened to blues and jazz and Latin music, and when we were little kids, like 2 or 3 years old, we had, Leadbelly and Woody Guthrie, and the gospel singers, Marian Anderson. Go ahead.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up outside of Philly, and a lot of the family was in Philadelphia and New York. So, what? A place that was called Penwyn or Overbrook. I don't know if any of you know the area. There's a guy moving to Philly right now. Moving back, oh yeah. And I was also there recently, but I really got out of there when I went to college, and it wasn't really my scene. And we used to play in these bands. We would play and we were in high school from DC up to Cambridge. And I remember one concert where we were playing, and there was like probably a few thousand people in the audience, and a guy comes on stage and he goes, "We're going to have 5 minutes of prayer." I'm going, what the hell is this, 5 minutes of prayer, and then he said that our president was just assassinated, and it was the moment of the JFK assassination. And so everybody, we stopped for a while, and then we started playing again. But that just was sort of symbolic of a lot of the stuff that was happening when we were growing up. And then when I went to college, I wanted to actually be a doctor and have medical studies, and I'll talk about that for a little bit. But I eventually came to Berkeley in the mid-'60s and was studying, pre-med and medical stuff. And part of what that was about, which I didn't even know until I had this very enlightening LSD experience, was when we were kids, a lot of the family members were blacklisted, and they moved to Mexico. And when we were 5 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, we would go visit the relatives there, and it was very interesting, and it was also infinite poverty. So here you are coming from like a middle class background, and you're seeing this stuff, and you just sort of get this subconscious guilt, and or whatever it was, a motivation to want to be a doctor. And then you had JFK saying, "Do the right thing, be a doctor in the Peace Corps." And so I was at Berkeley on an LSD experience, and I was looking down on the scene, and there was this old car winding up a mountain road, and there was these like flat spots where they would pull over, and your radiator would be boiling over, so these people had water there, and all these kids, like little kids, would come up to the car begging for money, showing you their crippled limbs and their sores and all their bad health, which was really disturbing. So I'm seeing this, and I see this kid in the back seat of the car looking through this little triangular window going, "Oh my God, look at these kids," And I said to myself, that kid is going to really be neurotic and probably want to be a doctor. And I said, wait a minute, that was me. So after that, I sort of realized that my real motivation for medicine was it just wasn't valid to me. And I was also doing a lot with music. So in those times in Berkeley, it was a super exciting party, and I just sort of decided to go more into the music thing. You wanted to ask something? No? Okay. So the scene in Berkeley, and I thought there would be a different generation of people here, but I'm glad to see that you're all here, that were probably here at that time. But I often talk about it to a lot of younger people, saying that you had bohemians, and then you had beatniks, and then in the mid to early 60s you had nonconformists, and then in the later 60s you had hippies. And what was happening, and this is just my opinion, is that the 50s and the early 60s were incredibly affluent, decadent, excessive, racist, warmongering, and environmentally degrading. And the middle class and more privileged kids that had the consciousness wanted to reject those values of materialism and all the excessiveness. And they started to adopt these philosophies or attitudes of what the hippies had, which was to reject materialism. And it was quite a wild party. I'm sure that most of you were here for it and experienced it. And some of them, what? No, nothing, okay. Some of the most interesting people came here to the Bay Area. I always said that some of the most remarkable and brilliant and intelligent and creative women came here to work and to do their thing and to do their art, and it was just great knowing them. And everybody, all the musicians, it was like the counterculture was in full swing here with the arts, music, theater, literature, and they were sort of the pillars of the counterculture and the hippie movement. And I was totally in love with it and involved in it. And I also had a big beard and long hair then. This is the first time I've really had a good beard going on in years. And so I lived a few blocks down the street from this library, like on Rose and what was called Grove, which is MLK. And we lived in a communal household, and a lot of us were involved in musical instruments and music. And there was that, right across from where Fat Apples is now, was a music store there. And we were sort of doing a lot of collaboration with them. And also, I know a lot of people see the cloud car going around, which has this design on it, and I'll tell you about all that later. But in those days, every hippie sort of had like some old car, and it was sort of their pride and joy, and they would go around and salvage parts from all the other wrecked cars, and it was sort of like taking some old thing and recycling it and keeping it going, rather than buying new cars and just sort of being part of that. So it's sort of like almost an identity. Like wherever you went around Berkeley, you would see these old cars, and you knew who was where and what cafe, or just from like where people were parked, or who was in what house, or whatever. And then, so we had a fleet of cars at our house, and when I grew up, I didn't like cars and was sort of into bicycles, but I was with some California guys and got into fixing up these old cars, and I still have a bunch of the same old cars from the late 60s, like the car parked in front of my store I was driving around in literally 50 years ago. And our household, because everybody was smoking a bunch of marijuana then, and this neighborhood was more of older people and a lot of divorcees with their kids. And so all these people, they liked us, but they said, "What's going on in your house? How come all these people are going in and out of your house all day?" Well, I couldn't tell them that they were going in there like to smoke pot and to play music. So we came up with this thing that we were this meditation society, and we had a picture of some big guru out front and a little sign that said the Vishanti Meditation Society. And everybody would come over there and meditate, by, it was just sort of like the word that we used, that everybody was going to be out back, like smoking marijuana. Anyway, that was the scene over there. Then subway guitars. I'll talk about that for a while. On that corner of across from Fat Apples was Prune Music, and that was one of the first little alternative type of music stores. And they would go to the flea market and get some old guitars, and they played a lot of music in there. It was a band. They sold some guitars, and one guy was repairing electronics and amplifiers. And I worked with them, and then I just started my own thing of doing the same thing. And they left town probably in 68 or 69, and I sort of started up over there on Cedar Street. And it was sort of the theme of the business was music as the weapon, because in the counterculture, so much of the music was very political, and that was sort of right in alignment with me, like Bob Dylan, singing all the civil rights songs, and music was really a powerful weapon in those days. So I was really happy to be, supplying all these instruments for all these bands and these musicians. And the guitar store was sort of a cooperative of repair technicians, and we would get all these repairs in, and everybody would share their time in the front taking care of customers, and then everybody would fix all these guitars and instruments and amps, and it wasn't a private business, it was more of a cooperative at the time. And we recycled a whole bunch of old guitars. People would bring us broken guitars, we'd fix them up and sell them like for $20 or $40. And we also had, some older guitars, and we were, what I say, the only game in town. And what that meant was that there were some music stores around that were the traditional type that sold pianos and new guitars that were very expensive, but we were selling a lot of used and secondhand and refurbished and recycled guitars. And most of the hippies wanted those type of instruments. They didn't want like a new shiny thing. They wanted some old instrument that had some soul to it and some character to it. And we did really good. All those bands that you've heard of, the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane and Big Brother and the Holding Company, Creedence Clearwater, they all came to us and got their guitars, and we still know a lot of them today. So they've been coming in for close to 50 years. And we also blended a lot with politics and music. And that, to me, was the real substance of my business. And it also gave me an opening and a doorway to what we called Rock Against Racism. And Rock Against Racism was a collaboration of all sorts of people in the music community to address racism, fascism, and sexism. And through my store and the connections of all these pop stars and people that had nightclubs or music journalists, we actually produced about 1,400 concerts around the world dealing with those issues, like Nelson Mandela and the Sandinistas. We sent a lot of medical aid to Nicaragua in the 80s. We did a lot of stuff for Planned Parenthood, and now we made concerts for Native health care and stuff for the United Farm Workers and whatever it was. And I worked a lot with Ashkenaz and La Peña in town. Both of those were other pillars, in the community that were still there. And it was extremely satisfying for me, and it was full of substance, and it was very successful. We really got a great command of the media, because you could have a band playing a concert somewhere, and it's one thing, but if it was like for, funding the United Farm Workers program, against pesticides, it really was an additional substance to it, and the media just loved it, so there's a lot of coverage by TV, magazine, radio shows, and newspaper articles, and they were prolific for years, and it was great. And the store still, to this day, is sort of a center for politics. I now call it the barber shop, where people sit around in there and talk about literature and politics and music and art. And the next part of Fat Dog's life is what we call the ranch. And that's really where the clouds come from. And there was a guy in Berkeley called Christos, and he was from New York and lived in Harlem and came out here, and he started painting t-shirts like this. This is actually one of his t-shirts, and he painted 500,000 of them in his lifetime, and he had people on Telegraph Avenue selling them. No, that was Christo, who was Bulgarian, and Christos was Greek from Corfu. And he painted about 40 buildings, a bunch of automobiles all over, and he did interiors, anything that could really have paint, like your refrigerator, He just was crazy. And
spray paint.
What?
Spray paint.
He spray painted them, yeah, using cardboard templates. And so I used to see him at the Cafe Mediterranean up on Telegraph all the time, and I was saying, well, how's it going? He says, well, I'm just about to buy this ranch up in Sonoma, and I'm really excited about it, and I'm going to have my art studio there. And it just went on, and he never really, he never really made a lot of forward progress with it. And then one day I saw him, he looked really, like distraught, and he said, well, these other people are trying to buy it, and I don't have quite enough money for it. So without ever even seeing it, I just gave him the money and bought it with him, sight unseen, which is unheard of, in the real estate thing. But I just knew that whatever he was going to get would be fine with me. So we got the ranch, and it was great, and it became sort of like another universe where people from all over the world and all over the country would be up there visiting, and musicians, photographers, artists. It was quite a thing. He had a studio there painting shirts. Then he died, and that was pretty heavy. And he wanted me to continue on with having all these creative people coming there, and also to bring a lot of kids up there, because when he was a boy in Harlem, or maybe once or twice a year, the dad would load them in a car and take them somewhere in the country, and it was like the most exciting thing that would happen to them. And it was sort of the thing, like, if you don't make your bed and keep your room clean, you're not going, so it was so exciting that the parents used it really to manipulate them to do whatever they wanted. So to him, having kids come up and run around in the country was his dream, and he fulfilled that, and then I sort of continued on with it. Then, for me, after he left, we started making guitars up there, and we have a guitar factory, and then we made thousands of guitars, and I get a lot of students or interns or apprentices or whatever you want to call them. One place, Bennington College in Vermont, in the wintertime, it's so cold there that they say they can't afford to heat their campus, and they send their students on this work-study, walkabout, whatever, intern program. And so I get a lot of their students, and they live up there, and they build a lot of guitars, and they have the time of their life up there. So we produced thousands of custom guitars, and I sell them on my website, and I sell them at the store, and people call up and say, I want this type of guitar with this, this crazy cockamamie, custom instruments, and we can just make, almost anything. And there's still a lot of people that are up there making them. And then another part of the ranch, which is exciting for me, is when I was a little boy, we used to hear this old blues musician called Howling Wolf, and all those blues guys and jazz guys, my parents listened to. So, me listening to music, I liked a lot of different things that would come and go, but for some reason there was something about the soulful sound of Howling Wolf that really I'd always come back to, and I always really liked his music. So I built a shrine to him up there, which looks like an old roadhouse in the hills of Arkansas in 1952, or something like that. And it's all with rusted corrugated metal and farm junk and old cars and trucks in the parking lot and a lot of folk art. And then inside is all these old guitars and amps and musical equipment that was used by all those rhythm and blues musicians in the 50s and 40s and 60s that had a very unique sound. And then we have old recording equipment there that's just in mono, nothing digital or, high end. It's sort of, I call it lo-fi, that they can capture the music they're playing, and it sounds like an old blues record of B.B. King or somebody in 1949. And that part of the ranch I'm sort of excited about now. So you just, evolve and you go through these different aspects of it. Making the guitars is okay, but now I have a bunch of other people to do it, so I just do some other stuff when I'm up there. And then the last part of the ranch, which is, probably in according with Christos's wishes, a lot of our peers aren't doing too well with health, and a lot of them don't have any money. And until the Affordable Care Act, it was really bad. I mean, you'd get better care at a veterinarian than a lot of the medical services people would get. So I had over the years, probably a couple dozen people that I knew that were on their way to heaven or somewhere where they were going, to live up there, and they lived up there for free, and they could be in fresh air and not have a pretty stressful, easy life for the last part of it. And that was, that's still going on. Right now, there's somebody up there who's, hopefully, she'll live for a while, but, we'll see what happens, And then the final part of what I want to talk about tonight is the ecstatic life of being in Berkeley and being with all of you people and all of your peers, which was just a remarkable time in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. This window was open, and the most amazing people were here. And I was sort of blessed to know a bunch of people. A lot of them were people in the music world, and I got to hang out with them extensively. Like, we would just get in old cars and drive off somewhere for a week or two at a time even, and just go camping and just go around. And I'm sure you know a bunch of them, so I'm just going to mention some of them to you. One was Bruce Barthol, and he was the musical director of the San Francisco Mime Troupe for years. And he and I hung out, went all over the place. I mean, just not here, but in Europe and New York. And I remember we were about half a mile away the first time they blew up the World Trade Center, and we were just sort of pretty much in awe of that. And he just did incredible stuff with politics and theater. Another one was Paul Sawyer, who probably some of you know, who was at the Unitarian Church on Bonita and Cedar, and he was just outrageous as a minister and activist. And we would literally get in a car and we'd go hang out with Ken Kesey and just go all over the place, just sort of having a rolling party wherever we went. We would get out and meet people and hang out. And then I noticed back there that another speaker that was here was Joe McDonald, and it was the same thing with him. We hung out off and on for years, just rambling around, doing this and that. It wasn't even so much about performing music. And then later on, this young guy worked at my store called Michael Franti, and I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's just probably one of the most amazing musicians and political activists that has ever come down the pike. And he lived in the subway building for years. He worked there building guitars, selling guitars, and was very much involved in the Rock Against Racism stuff, and went on to launch himself into a huge career where he plays all over the world at these huge soccer stadiums, and is still incredibly political. And then last but not least is my buddy the Maestro, and he and I have been hanging out there. We mostly just sit at the store a lot and go eat dinner all the time, or lunch. And he's a brilliant guy. He talks a lot about politics and music, and I can talk about anything. And that's who I went to Cuba with. And his real name is Taj Mahal, and you probably have all heard him. And so he was a great joy in my life for years. I would say for the last 15 years, almost on a daily basis. So that's it. Who wants to ask any questions?
Where's your camp?
What?
Where's your ranch?
It's in Sonoma.
Sonoma.
Yeah. And when you get old and ready to die, you can come up there. Oh yeah. And actually, I always enjoyed. Before we got the ranch in '76. Prior to that, we were over in Western Sonoma, which I enjoyed a lot more, and it was much more progressive over there. The Eastern Sonoma, which is the town of Sonoma and Glen Ellen, was super right-wing, conservative, Republican. I mean, if you had an Obama bumper sticker, somebody would probably want to run you off the road there. It's changed, though, more recently as people have been flushed out of here because of the prices, and a lot of people have moved up there. So you're getting a more diverse community up there, and more interesting, but it's still very, very suburban. Yes?
What years did Rock Against Racism
Rock Against Racism no, and I should, boy, we really need it now, if anything. But, it's like, some younger people need to be doing it too. But I've over the years, I've instructed people or, consulted them on how to, do this stuff. But I just couldn't do it anymore. But it started more in the early 80s. And actually, that's a good question because I'll tell you a little bit about it. Coors Beer. And somewhere in the early 80s, the CEO, president, and it's a privately held corporation, made a speech at a huge international business convention saying that black people were genetically inferior and they should be lucky that they were brought here in chains to build our country. So people were outraged by it. And the Coors sales plummeted. And they were doing a bunch of other stuff like supporting the Contras in Nicaragua, and I mean they were on the wrong side of everything. I mean everything from Nazis to South Africa, blah blah blah. So they said, "Yikes, we're losing a lot of money." So they decided to do some public relations work, and the first thing they wanted to do was have a soul music festival with African American musicians, where they would be posed with Coors beer cans and a blues festival. So we contacted all those bands and musicians and told them what was going on, and they were all pretty shocked because they didn't even know about it, and they pulled out of the festival. And we said, the only way that you should play at that is if they get a different sponsor. And then they had a black golf tournament, which we contacted a lot of people and sort of what Coors did. Yeah, we tried to, stop that. Then they put on some of these lowrider. They were super anti-Mexican, or like they would. I'm sure he's paying for the wall if he could. Super anti-Americano, and so then they put on a lowrider car competition. So we were trying to stop that. Now, one thing that we got in some real good trouble with, in great old Berkeley, Juneteenth, some number of years ago, guess who they chose as the sponsor? Coors. So we were down there really giving them hell for that. And they actually sent some cops to really intimidate us. But, it wasn't that good. And then another thing was there was this band here that was a really popular sort of rock band, and Coors offered them a lot of money to do basically a commercial. But in those days, they used the word MTV, which sort of this band thought, oh boy, we're going to be on MTV. But it was really like this thing where there's guys are sitting at a table and there's some young women there and they're drinking Coors, and the guys look over at each other like, yeah, these. Once they get drunk, it's all over, And then in the background are these guys in this band jumping around with Mexicans and Jews and blacks and everybody in it. So we sort of pulled the plug on that also, but some of the band members liked it and some didn't, actually. One of them still thinks that I ruined his musical career, but too bad for him, if I probably saved it. And then we did a lot of stuff sending, we had these concerts where instead of paying money, you would buy antibiotics to send to Nicaragua. At the time, we were blowing everybody up down there with our tax money. And then one thing after another, whatever it was, we were sort of involved in it. Subway became sort of a center. And I will say the Ashkenaz, too, and a few places, became a center for a lot of music and politics mixing, and a lot of activism. And I always use the word catalyzing the entertainers to speak out on all these political issues. And young kids, if they're teachers, their parents, even if they're religious, their church leaders tell them, like all this racist shit is, forget it. They don't even listen. But if their favorite rock star tells them, then they'll listen. Like that band Green Day, which is not. I'm not a big fan of them, but they did a huge thing with voter registration. Huge. They probably registered millions of young people. And they said you don't even have to be 18 to register to vote. And they would have a toll-free number to call where you could register to vote. And then when the kids were able to vote, hopefully they voted, for some good stuff. Who else has anything to ask? That's it?
You still playing?
What? I am still playing, yeah.
Are you in a band?
What? No, I just play and I enjoy myself playing,
Who was that guy that played with you in Philly?
Nah, we don't even go there. Yeah. Yes.
So, how are musicians coming together right now to deal with that?
It's pretty pathetic. I hate to say it, and what it is that I could say that the values, and that's a strange word to use, but the values of younger people aren't so concerned with compassion and this stuff, and they're more worried about the status of a magnetic strip on their credit card than blowing up or incinerating a million people somewhere. And we're still trying to encourage as much as we can them to be conscious and to speak out on it, but it's a different scene in a different world now. And I just noticed that concert in England where the bomb went off, they're doing something there right now to raise some money, like for the Red Cross and for the victims or the families of the people that survived. Yes?
Did you ever mix in with the Teton Tea Party group?
The what?
60s Teton Tea Party?
No. Nope, I didn't know about them. Or maybe I knew them, but I didn't know who it was,
Barry Brown?
Nope, I don't know that. And also, I hate to say it, my memory has really failed as I've gotten older. Yeah. But
Was it already covered?
I can't hear you.
Was it already covered where the clouds concept came from?
Yes, I talked about Christos painting clouds. I'll tell you about Christos. So here's this guy, grows up in Harlem, and is worse than a badass dude. He's in a motorcycle gang that was notoriously considered probably the worst motorcycle gang in history. They were, on drugs, shooting each other, So every summer they'd ride across the country with their motorcycle gang and go to East LA and hook up with this other gang there. And while he was down in LA, a truck ran him over on his motorcycle and had like 20 broken bones and was in the hospital for like a few months and had complete amnesia. And his baby brother, who I knew, and this is a very interesting story, his baby brother that I knew was a hippie and lived on a hippie commune. So, when he got out of the hospital, he didn't even know who he was or where to go. And his baby brother didn't even like him that much, but he brought him up to the commune they lived in. And he's going, wow, groovy, peace, And he was just sort of like, he had no memory of his past. And then somehow he started spray painting with spray cans these clouds. He's had some sort of maybe artistic abilities. And then he's painted some shirts, and people really thought they were cool, especially like if you're like a pot smoker, you're up in the clouds or whatever. It was a very popular theme, and he put different themes on them, like lightning bolts or rainbows, or this one has a rose on it, maybe for the Grateful Dead. And then it just exploded into a huge business. And he made a lot of money from it. And then after about 2 or 3 years, his memory started to come back. And he said, hell no, I'm having much more fun now, And then a few of his old buddies, and over the years, came to visit at the ranch. I remembered meeting them. And they had, reformed also, but they were maybe like, doing some jobs in New Jersey, installing appliances or stuff like that. But, they had sort of reformed also, but they had left the old ways behind. And one time we were sitting around the guitar store, and Christos was there, and another guy was there from Brooklyn. And he had a motorcycle, a big, nasty motorcycle. He said, yeah, man, we used to be like the baddest motorcycle gang in New York, except for these guys called the Ford Baldies, which they'd come roaring out of Harlem on these big chrome Harleys. And when we heard them coming, we'd just jump on our bikes and get the hell out of there. And Christos was just sitting there with this biggest grin on his face because that's the group that he was in. And then those two guys became really good buddies, many years later.
So he painted your store and your.
Yeah,
car?
well, he painted my car. Very, very honestly, we painted the store. I know how to paint the clouds too, and some other people did. And after he died, they painted the stores. I mean, they painted the store, and I repainted the car twice since he had it painted. And I painted some other cars for people too over the years. But you might see a few shirts like this laying around here and there. But they were painted. He died in 1990, so that's 27 years ago. But there's still shirts around. I still have some, and other people do. Okay, was that? Yes.
Do you want to say something about your relationship over the years to marijuana?
Marijuana.
What do you think
Yeah.
about drugs?
I used to think it was the greatest thing ever, and it was like the holy sacrament. And then somehow along around 1980 or so, when I just had so much stuff going on, I stopped smoking because you really couldn't do that much. And I often say it's the thief of initiative. And there's nothing wrong with that unless you have a lot of stuff you have to do. And then recently, I had a little bout of cancer and chemotherapy, and they gave me the card to go get marijuana. And you know what? I couldn't even be bothered to get it. I smoked one puff of it one time and went, oh, this is, it actually helped, but the chemotherapy was pretty easygoing. And maybe if it was worse for other people, that the marijuana would help a lot more, but I really don't care anymore about it. And it was really the marijuana was sort of like a pillar of the counterculture. You either smoked it or you were in some other group of fraternity jocks getting drunk, drinking beer or something. Yes?
How do kids find out now about your
What?
brand?
I don't know. Right now I'm not really having a lot of people up there, but they come by the store and just certain people come by there and they say, I want to learn how to build guitars. And it's a little bit more difficult now because there was a lot more people going back and forth. So for young kids to go back and forth, it's not only expensive, it takes a whole day too. But to spend the whole day up there. But we'll see what happens in the future. And also this last winter, which was particularly cold and miserable, I didn't have the students coming, also because I was on the chemotherapy, and I easily could have dealt with it, but for my side effects were like the cold really bothered you, like your fingertips. I don't know if anybody's had the pleasure. Your fingertips feel like there's electricity in them when it gets cold, and even your nose feels like there's a bunch of hair brushing your nose all the time. I kept going like this, but I don't even have hair long enough to brush my nose. So you have these weird sensations, and then for me, I was a little bit more weary, and I didn't have the energy, so I would go up there. I didn't want to have the students because I knew that they would involve a lot of my time, and I just didn't feel like doing it. And then I had some more tried and true people that knew much more of what they were doing, and they would come up there, and I just sort of I don't want to use the word supervise, but I guess it was something like that, help them, and then I would stay there about 4 or 5 hours and then come back. But now I'm all better, and I can spend a lot more time up there. We'll see what happens next year with the students. Okay, that's it. Okay. I can't even see how to turn it off, and I should now.
Did you have one more question or not?
Nope.
Last couple questions?
Yeah.
have some
What?
announcements to make.
Oh, go ahead. You make the announcement.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming to the Berkeley Stories.